If you've ever considered leaving the traditional life you have now or the traditional job you have now and jump into a full life of nonstop travel in which you have a lot of choice over how you spend each moment of your day, whether it's working or relaxing, surfing, flying drones, scuba diving, or whatever it is that you want to do, this episode is for you. I think there are kind of two misperceptions that I think of as I reflect on today's podcast episode. The first one is that most people think that this life of full-time travel needs to be cheap, that you have to be a backpacker who's roughing it, and you don't. You can be like Helen and Tim and flying business class because you did it right and you set yourself up with tons of points and miles that you earn for free as a result of being smart with your credit card strategy prior to jumping into your life of travel. Or a lot of people think you need to have it all figured out on how you're going to make money while traveling. Or you could think about it the way that Helen and I did, which is let's create a runway and a safety net for ourselves as we figure it out and figure out what it is that we want. And so in today's podcast episode, we're going to unpack some tips and tricks and also how Helen and I thought about our own jumps and how we made them. I'm really excited for today's podcast episode, but if you're new here, welcome. I'm Christine Lozada. This is another episode of Everyday Badassery, a podcast meant to inspire you to be just 1% more badass today than you were yesterday. Think about it. People just see us on social media being like, they're doing the thing. They figured it out. And it's like, but you don't see all the other things that happened to get us there. And I think what's really important about today's podcast episode is we uncover that for you. So with that, let's bring in Helen.
So I'm Helen Schuckers. It seems like such a weird question to ask, but I have spent my entire life doing fun things outdoors, and it all started when I was in my 20s and I moved out to California. Ended up in Oregon with my now husband. Been together for 12 years, and we spent quite a long time of our relationship hiking mountains around the world, as well as just even in our own backyard. And we recently, in the last few years, decided that it's now or never. We're young. We have legs that work. Our knees don't hurt completely yet, and that we needed to physically do this for ourselves. And also we were burnt out. We both worked in healthcare. And just worked through all the stuff and just felt like we needed a break. And so we decided to save up money, quit our jobs. And here we are 16 months later, on the road full time, sitting here in the beautiful country of Guatemala. We just spent 2 months in Mexico, and we're in our 18th country now.
Yes, they're doing the things. They made the big jump, and we are going to unpack how they set themselves up to take that jump, because a lot of people don't really know where to start. And so one of the things that we will do is kind of break down how we did it with some helpful resources that Helen has to help you think about it for yourself as well. But where I want to start is with the adventure. So you've been traveling full time, currently in Guatemala now. Love that. For over a year. You've been traveling for over a year. What have been some like the coolest things that you've done in the past year plus?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
I know, right?
Maybe it's like what we haven't done, but we haven't done a lot. But I guess off the top of my head, we tend to go a little bit extreme on outdoor sports. I would say one of my favorite moments of just traveling in general was spending 2 weeks each in a camper van, both in Norway and New Zealand, and really being able to drive around both of those countries and just hiking the shit out of everything, living in close quarters, and really experiencing kind of waking up morning to night on our own terms, where we didn't feel like we had to be like tied down to going back to a hotel room and going back to a base of any kind that we could just wake up and all of a sudden there's these big ass glaciers right outside our door. Or, we wake up like early morning and we hike to the depths of a fjord and just overlook with sunrise and just really take it all in. I think another moment was also, I think it was in Italy. We hiked, oh my gosh, this story gives me kind of anxiety because my husband Tim tends to push me a little bit harder because he knows I'm capable, but I have so many like mindset doubts when it comes to physical things a lot. We scaled a waterfall. They call this sport via ferrata. Essentially, it means like you're bolted on a side of a mountain with like a climbing harness, and then you're like clipping in and out, and they're fixed like bolts. So it's not your traditional type of climbing where you're like on a rope and you're getting yourself up a rope, but they're metal rungs that you like walk up, or you clip in and out, and then you traverse either up a mountain or to the side of one. And they're really popular in Europe, and a lot of these routes are free, and there's like Via Ferrata maps like all over Western Europe. Specifically, there's some in the US too. I think you have to pay with a guide. But we scaled up this waterfall just outside of the Italian Dolomites, and the difficulty rating was like, I think like a class 3. It was like rated very difficult, and Tim did not tell me this because he knew I would chicken out. And so this is like the part of our marriage, and I'm like, that's kind of not a beige, that's a red flag. Like why am I doing this right now? And I remember like we're in this sheer face going up, and it's like wet, like the waterfall is like hitting my face, and I'm not really having a good time. My legs are shaking, and I feel like I can barely hang on. And if I let go, of course, my harness will catch me, but I'm like terrified. But I would say that was one of my favorite memories because it took over an hour and a half to get up this dang waterfall, but it was just the adrenaline. It just felt so good after we were done. And like that was a really big moment for us because we're like, this is why we're traveling. This is why we're doing the things, to feel alive,
I love this adventure. I'm actually curious. Tell me this, because Helen said that she used to be in healthcare and she was like working really hard, getting burned out doing that. If you were to go back and tell the Helen, I don't know, 10 years ago working in healthcare, like this is what your life looks like now, would she believe you, and what would she say?
She would not believe how this journey would have come. And actually, fun fact, 10 years ago, I didn't work in healthcare. I was in a completely different profession. But if I was in healthcare for 10 years, I think I wouldn't even change the trajectory of where my career has gone, because I feel like certain types of professions are for certain types of people. And for me, I just couldn't sit in a box and like be happy with that. Like my life existed outside of it, and that I'm not built for that environment. I think a lot of people might force themselves to maybe like fit in that environment. But for me, I always felt that life for me was outside of like a traditional work setting, outside of an office. I was in a cubicle, and I felt trapped. And 10 years ago, I would have been like, that's the dream. I'm making the 6 figures, and I'm maybe being able to like buy all the luxury things or the things that I feel like would have made me happy. But now 10 years later, I'm like, what makes me happy is experiences and being able to share that with the people I love. And my family lives overseas now. So 10 years ago, my parents were still living in the US, and I would have been like, oh, that's great. They're there. They're not aging. They're living their life. And now 10 years has gone by. They've moved. They're taking care of grandparents overseas. So for me, I had to kind of adapt and make those life choices based on being able to see my family, spend time with them, and also being real with myself. Like, that's not going to work for me.
That's powerful. So I think about my own jump into the life I have now as a YouTuber, whatever that means, right? Full-time traveler and YouTuber and drone pilot. And if I were to go back and tell the Christine who, what do you mean you don't like a cubicle? My ball and chain were the same beige color as my cubicle walls, right? If I were to go back and tell her, like, the life you live now, like if I were to give a couple highlights of the life I live now, it's like, Hey, Christine, by the way, did you know that you will be living on a yacht in the Maldives using drones to find manta rays? And that's going to be your quote job. Or that, you will get invites to be one of the first people dressed up as a mermaid swimming with whale sharks in Mexico. But you'll decline that opportunity because instead you'll be with an ocean nonprofit exploring the ocean of Bonaire Island while discovering one of your now most favorite places to travel. And fast forward, you'll be on a filming tour playing pickleball across the United States while creating amazing highlighting stories of nonprofits that a brand called Liquid IV, while you're living on a bus, donates to. And you're going to film this whole thing for an entire 3-tour series and fill in the blank, right? If I were to tell the Christine back then in her cubicle walls that this is what your life would become, she would say no. Honestly, she would say no. She would say, mm-mm. You are currently on the trajectory to become at the executive level of these corporations at Walmart.com and Amazon, where I used to work. You are getting promoted at a rate that other people have never been promoted at before. You are making a 6-figure income. You just bought a $1.1 million apartment in San Francisco. No, like you are not going to do that. Like this is the life that you are on. This is the life that people expect out of you. And this is what you are supposed to do. This is why you went to college. This is why you fill in the blank, fill in the blank. It would be very difficult for me to believe, but I also, in the same way that you said it, you were meant to be outside. And a part of me wondered about something else. And so I'm curious about your beginnings of wondering about something else because, you talked about how you made this jump, but you didn't just jump. Like you kind of started to plan for it. So take us through that moment in your life. Like where were you when you were starting to think about, I think it should be something else?
Yeah, I think that journey really started when I was 18. I'm not going to go that far back, but I started telling myself, like, what is my purpose in life? I think a lot of us ask that and we never really truly find that because I think it's a progression, right? It evolves and it changes based on what I'm going through. But for me specifically, the full-time travel journey, I've always seen so many different people, whether it be on YouTube or Instagram, talk about like how their journey has transformed because they took the leap to do this travel journey. And I'm like, there's no other way. And so about 3-4 years ago, my husband and I found this movement called the Financial Independence Retire Early movement. It's FIRE abbreviated. And I never understood the concept of it. And it's like a light bulb moment where essentially the concept means is that you are creating and saving money at a more, I guess, accelerated rate than most people. So traditionally you're saving between 4, maybe 8% of your salary. But the FIRE movement and people who are in this movement tend to save somewhere between 30, even up to like 70% of their income. Mm-hmm. And so we started doing this for about 3 years. And while we started, we didn't really think about like, oh, we want to travel full time. We were thinking about how we can invest this money to like maybe buy investment properties or like what's our next move financially. And it's kind of similar to your story where like we wanted all the things, become this millionaire and become, all of these like kind of more quote unquote materialistic things until we realized, like a lot of people during the pandemic, we wanted to experience and actually travel more because that was taken away from us all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And so we like diverted our mindset to like, no, we want to take this money and go travel. Like, I don't care. Like we can buy property later on in life. We're not ready to just settle down and not do the things that we want to do now. And so our mindset was really setting up the systems in place financially for us first before taking the leap and quitting our jobs. I actually gave my workplace like almost like a 10-month notice before I left.
Wow.
And so we were really thoughtful. We both were in positions where our workplaces valued what we did. And Tim is a physical therapist and I worked in health research. And we came up with a plan with our managers of like, okay, this is what our plans are. You can expect this to happen. And besides saving money, we also saved up credit card points and miles in the same time frame. and we saved up like 1.5 million miles to be able to offset financially
That's huge.
our flight costs for the entire year. So in our first year in 2023, we saved over $40,000, and I think we flew business class like at least 8 to 10 times during our
That's
travel journey. So
amazing. Yes.
we a lot of people think like, oh, like you have to be a broke backpacker to, to quit your job and just go all in and live on a budget. But we actually did the opposite. We were very thoughtful about, this is the amount of money we saved between 50 and 60 grand to really have good experiences, stay in nicer places, fly business class, and, being able to really enjoy almost like the fruits of our labors. At that point we had worked for over 10 years and we really wanted to do it right for us because we knew what we wanted to get out of this journey. And so just having a thoughtful plan in place versus just quitting your job was important to us, because we knew financially, one, it's a lot of stress on a marriage, but also two, we knew that having the finances in place, we could stay on the road for long term without having to worry about like having a job or working right away. And though we do run, maybe online businesses and rent our house and we cash flow and are able to do that, it just sets up the systems in place, and it was important for us. And I know everybody's journey is very different.
Yes.
So.
One of my favorite things about your story is that you were not the backpacker. A lot of people think that to make this jump into full-time travel, it has to look and be very, very, very cheap. You're staying in hostels, that you're backpacking. And I was the same, where when I made my jump, and I'll talk about the runway that I created also, I stayed at a hostel once ever in my life. And aside from that, like I stay in hotels like over 300 days a year normally. These days these days it's a lot of cruise ships, but that's a whole other story. But it doesn't have to be that way. So you talked about kind of two things here, which was about this FIRE movement with the early retirement, as well as some really killer strategies with points and miles. And so if you're hearing this and you're curious about it, make sure you check the show notes, because Helen, tell us a little bit more about some of the resources that you have available on your website.
Yeah, so we do have a section that talks about, if you want to learn about FIRE, the basics of FIRE. We have a nice downloadable, just kind of like our strategies that we use to be able to save money and maximize savings. And really lays out resources like books and podcasts that you can listen to really dive deep. That's how we started our journey. And then points and miles, we have on our website, we also feature a Patreon page. We have a 3-day workshop. You can sign up for a free trial for the Patreon community. We do monthly meetups and just really geek out over points and miles and how we can maximize and how you can save money on that. And so, yeah, definitely check it out. For us, it's not about like, oh, this is all the points that we can save and how we can hang on to them, but we really want to be able to use them and leverage them how it fits with your travel journey. So.
I love that. Give us a one and one obviously all of that is going to be in the show notes below, but give us one tip. If someone like wants to do this whole early retirement, like wants to save more, a lot more now, like what's one tip you would give them on that side?
I would say, I think the one tip I would say is getting out of the mindset of thinking you have to do it quickly. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I just want to save a bunch of money and retire. But we're actually doing the opposite. So I'm going to give a shout out to the pioneers in the slow 5 movement of like really taking your time to get to the journey of where you want to go in this financial independence space. So in a way, for the last 5 years, we've saved money up to a point that we can almost call it a semi-retirement, or people might call it a gap year, or insert whatever you want to call it. But it's also, for us, it's testing out what true retirement would feel like and if we would even resonate with it. And I think for me, I'm probably a lot like you, Christine, where I probably will work the rest of my life because I really enjoy everything about working and being stimulated. And that this period of 16 months have made me realize like finding purpose is important. And that's through working towards a goal of some kind. And so having this early retirement test period has made me realize like when I actually truly retire in whatever time frame it may be, 10, 20 years from now, I know what to do with my time. Like I know how to
Ah,
navigate
interesting.
it. Where can you imagine working 40 years of your life and all of a sudden you're like, all right, this is it. Your job's
Mm-hmm.
over.
Mm-hmm.
What's next? Like I recently talked to a friend who retired after a 35-year career at the same health research institute that I worked at. And he's been in a real funk, doesn't really know his purpose.
Yeah.
And like, besides volunteering and maybe taking some courses at the local community college, he's like, I don't know what to do with my time.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, I want to be able to just have so many badass moments,
Mm-hmm.
even if I'm retired at retirement age, or even if I'm taking my semi-retirement, and like knowing how to structure that. I think as human beings, we're routine people. We like structure. We like knowing what's going on, what's coming up
Yeah.
next. So having this time to take your time to be able to figure out what that financial independence journey looks like, even if you take a break from saving to really analyze what you might want later in life, is so important.
I
So
think that's
good tip.
interesting because
Mm-hmm.
also how, like, what your life will look like and how much that life will cost might be something different than what you originally expect and will help you to understand how much money you actually need to save up. Because I think that's an important part. So I love that. Okay. So if you are interested about retiring early, understanding what your retirement might actually look like would be a helpful tip. On the points and miles side of thing, if someone's never like dabbled in points and miles before, what would be one tip that you would give them on that front?
I would say start simply. For us, it was just opening up that first credit card and realizing that, oh, we can get something out of it. Like if we're already spending the money, one, if you're spending money on a debit card, you're not protected by the bank. If somebody
Mm-hmm.
takes your money, sometimes they could just not give it back. Where if you're paying on a credit card, it's protected and you
Exactly.
have more security areas around that. But just picking one card and for what's your biggest spending category? Was it groceries? Is it travel? Identifying, for us at the time when we were living in Portland, Oregon, before we left on our full-time travel journey, is like it was groceries and travel. So we identified a card that really fit within that. And so instead of getting your traditional, like maybe 1 point or nothing, we were getting 2 to 4 times, even 5 times on our spending to go towards collecting extra points. And with that first credit card, you also have to identify the biggest sign up bonus to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that you're getting your whatever the sign up bonus is, 60,000, 100,000 points when you make a minimum purchase across a few months. That's what kicks you off and gives you the motivation and drive to be like, oh shit, like I can get a free flight or two and fly my family somewhere. And that is, it's like the launch pad, right? Seeing that, wow, this is so possible, even within a few months to get a free flight, just taking that baby step and then working your way up with that one card, maybe 6 months to a year later, add the second card. It doesn't have to happen right away. So
I love that. Baby
yeah.
steps. So if you have never dabbled in points and miles, that's understanding like where are you spending your money now? It could be something as simple as groceries, right? Open your first credit card, look for the big sign up bonuses and get started small. I like that tip. And there, don't forget in the show notes, tons of more resources available to you from Helen. So check that out. My journey, I would say I'm going to start with the tip and then I'm going to tell you how I did it. My tip would be understand what your current spending habits are and also understand what that might look like differently if you start a full-time travel lifestyle. And so what I did was just in a simple, coming from Walmart and Amazon, I love Excel spreadsheets, but in a simple spreadsheet, and it was just very, very simple. It was literally like what my monthly spending habits look like now. I tried to just guess on how that might look a little bit different if I'm traveling full time. An example of that being, well, I no longer have I don't remember, $4,266 a month mortgage with a 700 and something dollar HOA fee per month. Like, boom, that's gone. Like, don't need to worry about that. Now I have an Airbnb or a hotel expense or something like that. What will that look like per month? And then before I left my corporate job, I just try to like start to understand how much do I need to have saved as a cushion to give me how many months or how much time out on the road as I explore this life in YouTube. And then I just create a couple scenarios. Okay, if I'm staying at the nice Hilton properties. Okay, if I'm staying at, less luxurious Airbnbs, they're simple but clean. And I just gave myself a couple scenarios of what my life could look like and how many months of a runway that would give me. And I created a couple of those scenarios. And then once I felt comfortable, that's what helped me to make the jump out of the corporate world. What's interesting is I created that runway for myself. It was, I think, 16 months. And I still use that same exact spreadsheet now. And now fast forward, it's been 4 years. And so I still have a runway and I'm still figuring it out. But that's my tip, is just because a lot of people don't even understand what their current spending habits look like. Because another perfect example is I stopped using the gym membership that I was at before, which was Barry's boot camp. That used to cost me like $35 per 1 hour workout. And now I use a gym membership at Orange Theory because I switched over, and they have gyms all over the world. And so now that my life is on the road, I work out at Orange Theory Fitness everywhere else. And that's literally half the price of a third of the price of Barry's boot camp. And so that's another just simple change. And it's not a big deal, but it's a really simple change. I also go to Starbucks a lot because I can order from the app, and that's also available everywhere. Let's end with, what would be the most rewarding, the most badass rewarding part of your life now that you've made this jump and you're a full-time traveler? What's been the most rewarding thing about it for you?
I think just getting to do whatever the fuck I want.
Yes. It's the freedom. It's the freedom.
Like this morning I woke up, I'll just give you a play-by-play of what I did this morning. I woke up in bed. I was like, okay, I'm going to take 30, 45 minutes to get out of bed. I literally walked over to the balcony, looked at the surf, like, okay, do I want to go out? Do I want to go out in the water, go for an hour, came back in, went to go get coffee with my husband, and now I'm on this podcast interview, and just have, maybe a few hours of calls, catching up with friends, or doing different Patreon things that we have, and then spending the rest of the afternoon in the pool. So I don't know. I guess in a way I'm like, okay, I picked kind of a lazy life, but I feel like at a certain point as human beings, we're always taught to be productive about everything that we have to do in life. Like, when is enough enough?
Yes.
And it's okay to have some time to relax. And this life of building that financial runway and being able to be thoughtful about how we planned out to do this full-time travel journey, we have a lot of control over our time and our schedule. And for me, that's everything. And I don't think I could ever go back to a traditional 40-hour work week life. So.
Freedom of time, to have the freedom of choice of what you do with that time. That's everything. I feel like too often people are blinded by, I just need a lot of money, or I just need a lot of stuff, like possessions, a new car. And it's like, but does that give you the freedom to, for me, wake up at 10:30 a.m. and have coffee, and then film this podcast episode, and then get onto another cruise, my third cruise tomorrow, and later tonight probably play about 4.5 hours of pickleball. That's freedom of time. If I wanted to do something else and be productive, I could, if I wanted to, but we have the choice. I love that. So many resources are in the description for you. But again, tell us, Helen, where can people find you and your resources?
Yeah, they can visit helenandtimtravel.com. You can find our YouTube channel, our financial independent resources, as well as if you want to learn about points and miles and our Patreon community, it's all there for you. And of course, you can always send us a DM on Instagram at helenandtimtravel. Very responsive on there as well. So take your pick.
I love it. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Had a lot of fun.
In case you didn't know, this is part of a series that I'm doing with Helen. So the podcast right before this, check out what she's doing. She's conquering the world one mountain at a time. She's traveling the world hiking with her husband, Tim. And it's not always easy. We share some of the hard stories in the previous podcast episode about Nepal. So if you missed that, join us over there. There's more resources in the show notes below. Be smart with your points and miles. Consider what is this early retirement thing? Check it out. Why not? Think about things differently. Join Helen and I at Camp Indy and lots of other places you can travel with me. All of that is in the show notes as well. I'm Christine Lozada. Connect with Helen. Connect with me. I'm at Christine Lozada everywhere. I'd love to hear from you. And if you found some value in today's podcast episode, please leave a positive review. It only takes a second, but it really does help to distribute this to more people. In the meantime, go forth, be badass, and I'll see ya in the next adventure. Ciao.